So, speedy recap. I'm timing myself. We started all those weeks ago with a timeline, a simple timeline, simpler than what you could Google probably. Um, and this timeline just shows us where some of these major stories happen, right? Adam and Eve happened before King David, which happens before Jesus. And understanding how these stories flow and understanding where they occur really help us to understand the overarching story. And so we had the same timeline, but we put the books of the Bible in there, understanding in particular how some of these books are not in chronological order. And some of these books are written to very specific people. And the easiest example is about some of these prophets that are either writing to the north or to the south. And so we talked about how Mike looks like a crazy person every week, trying to connect some conspiracies of how these all work together. And this is usually like a breaking point for all of us when we're trying to make sense of things that seem like they can't make sense. So then we made it a little bit more complicated and started to talk about translation. And we started to talk about the way that we think about our Bibles. And we talked about the difference between art and science when it comes to translation, and how, yes, there are rules about how language works, but it's not so easy to bring an ancient foreign language into English. It's hard enough for us to understand Old English, let alone really old other languages. And so it is a tension between art and science. So we use this example of fluid turbulence with Starry Night, and how it's both this artistic and scientific phenomenon. So we talked about some examples with that. We talked about the John 21 passage of Jesus and Peter, "Do you love me? Yes, I love you, Lord," but how different versions of the word love are used. Now, depending on your interpretation of that, will determine how you translate it. Some people say it's very significant that two different versions of love are being used here. Some people say this is run of the mill for the Gospel of John. Some people say, hey, the English says love. That's all we need to care about. Whatever you come to on that decision, it is an interpretive move. And so we talk a little bit more, moving from translation to contextualization. We know that we want to look for context in all kinds of things. Sometimes someone will pull one line out of an interview in the news and say, look what this person said. And they go, oh, you took me out of context. Well, this happens, unfortunately, with the Bible all the time. We use the word proof texting usually, where someone will just pull out a random verse to make it agree with the idea they want to communicate. Um, but it goes much deeper than that. Sometimes for us to gain a fuller appreciation and understanding of what a story is telling us, we really need to look at the surrounding context. But contextualization is that same idea, but it's almost like a form of translation in itself, because we're taking an idea like this passage from First Corinthians 13 on the right, love is patient, love is kind, and we're trying to make it make sense in a new context. And so we gave the example of Gen Z and their super weird slang terms, and how you could translate this or contextualize this passage into slang for kids. Now, to be clear, kids don't think this is cool. This is just a funny anecdote. But the point stands. Contextualization is an important part of how we understand scripture. And often that's what pastors are doing. But then it turns out that it looks like the gospel authors were doing this. We use the example of the paralytic and his friends, and how in one version of the story, the people were digging through a roof, like in this lower left hand photo. And in another story in Luke's gospel, they were removing tiles to lower the person through the roof, which is a very significant architectural difference, especially when we understand the archaeological and cultural context of the areas where these stories were being told. And so we observed some of the other differences between how different stories are told between the different gospels. And this image you've probably seen at least 10 or 15 times now, the Wesleyan quadrilateral. These four skills, these four areas or schools of thought that influence the way that we understand our faith, our Bibles, and our theology. Talk about scripture. Well, of course, that's where God is speaking. We also talk about reason, the way that we think, the way that we make sense of the world around us. We talk about tradition, the things passed down to us, the things that our forefathers and foremothers have said, yes, this is the way. We go, okay. We talk about our experience. You know, what are we actually encountering in our own lives, in our own walks of faith? And of course, in a perfect world, these things all work in a beautiful harmony together. But in reality, our world is much more complex than that. And usually we've got people in the experience quadrant at odds with the people in the tradition quadrant. And we've got people with the scripture quadrant, just read it, at odds with the logic quadrant. And it becomes a mess. And so now that brings us to today's topic, which is interpretation, which is one of the most, if not the most, controversial ways that we encounter scripture. And really, interpretation is a question of what is this text actually saying? Can we say that a text only has one meaning, or can it have multiple meanings? Um, are we comfortable with that? That's an interpretive move too. And so, interpretation is interesting because at every stage of what we've talked about so far, interpretation has already occurred. When it comes to the way that your Bible is organized, the order in which the Bible is presented to you, the decision about which books are in the Bible, those are interpretive moves. The decisions about which words are translated in which way, those are interpretive moves. The decision of how we shift these stories, how we contextualize them, how we make sense to others about them, that's an interpretive move. And so interpretation is something that we are doing all the time, whether or not we know it or not. Many of us have friends, spouses, etc. And if you text, you know how easily you can misread or misunderstand or misinterpret someone's meaning in a text message. There are countless, infinite examples of how this can happen. Sarcasm's a perfect example. Some people are great at it, some people are not great at it, and most people are bad at understanding it. But there's nothing worse than when someone makes a joke or makes something sarcastic, and someone believes it to be true. And now we're in a whole mess. Now we're just forever going to be. You said this. I didn't mean that. And Hmm. That's an interesting idea that we keep coming back to, this idea of what is being said and what is being heard. And that's really the question of interpretation. But the difference is when we look at the Bible, we don't have a person to speak for the Bible. We don't have one singular author. Even if we had one singular author, they definitely have been dead for a while. And so they can't set the record straight about what these things meant. And so what we have are countless people going to the Bible saying, aha, this is what this person meant. Problem is, a lot of good meaning people come to different conclusions. And so this could be described as a too many cooks in the kitchen situation. But there are there are all kinds of complications when it comes to interpretation. When we come to the Bible, whether we're little kids or, retired and with great grandchildren, the reality is that we're bringing things with us to our interpretation. Like, no matter what you do, it is completely unavoidable. You can do your best to be objective, to try and just read things as they are, to set your own like desires aside or ideas. But the reality is that at any given point in your life, what you bring to any situation, whether it's a relationship or to a classroom or to your Bible in prayer, you bring your entire life experience with you. And that's a good thing, but it's also a complicated thing because we've got over 7 billion people on earth doing the same. You bring your culture, you bring the way that you were raised, you bring your values as a individual, you bring your values as a Christian, you bring your values as a parent or as a friend. All of these things are a part of you, and and as we develop as human beings, we do so much of this subconsciously. The way that we think about manners, the way that we think about interacting with strangers, much of this we learn how to do so quickly that we do it subconsciously.
Mhm.
And so, in the same way, when we come to scripture, there's a lot of subconscious forces at work. And, one of the most important things for any human being is to be self aware and reflective. But especially when we're trying to interpret God's word, it's really important. So there's this person who is immensely influential to me, one of the greatest theologians, if not the greatest theologians of the 20th century, named Leslie Newbegin. And Newbegin was he was a guy. He was one of those guys named Leslie. But Newbegin utilized the ideas of the sociologist Peter Berger, who talks about this idea called plausibility structures. And so Newbegin is building on Berger's idea. But to just summarize Berger's idea, essentially a plausibility structure is a framework that we see the world through. But it's not just an individual framework, it's a communal framework that we as a society have decided. So you could say maybe a family has a plausibility structure or a framework or a lens through which they see the world, but maybe a town does. Maybe Swickley has a framework. Maybe Moon does, Aliquippa, wherever. Maybe Pittsburgh is understood, right? We look at election maps and that's how we talk about it. Oh, look, it's another blue city. Oh, look, it's a red county. We describe entire blocks of populations of people by one idea when we know realistically that's not a completely fair version of the story. But a plausibility structure is really that framework through which we understand reality. And so what Newbegin does, he builds on this idea, and he takes it a little bit further. Plausibility structures, he says, it's what you immediately believe for whatever reason, whether your parents told you this is the right way to see the world, or you came to this conclusion after years and years of testing out ways to live, you've decided like this is what's immediately believed. Things that contradict this, they're out. And so every society throughout human history has depended on these things. We agree upon standards for living. Um, what is the most plausible? It's where we get the word and the phrase, the plausible way for this society to continue. So I'm not trying to get us too bogged down here, but I do want to start here. Um, the difficulty becomes that one, sometimes there's multiple plausibility structures at work. Maybe there's different plausibility structures depending on your gender. So maybe there's different plausibility structures depending on your race or depending on your uh, economic status or depending on your geographical location or depending on whether or not you have kids. There are all kinds of things that shape the way that we understand the world around us. And so plausibility structures become very difficult because sometimes they're all working at the same time. The other side is that often they are subconscious. We don't necessarily know that they are at work in us. And so Newbegin takes this idea and takes it further. He says, this isn't just in reality, this is in the church. Churches have plausibility structures, but not just churches, denominations do. And not just denominations, individual churches within denominations. We know that not every Presbyterian church is the same. We've got PCA and PCUSA and ECO, and how many more acronyms can we come up with? I don't know. They all use the title Presbyterian, but they do use a different style of Presbyterian. But even within our denomination, like our church is PCUSA, we've got all kinds of differences between our church and other PCUSA churches. Maybe they're not even differences we could put down on paper, but they are there. The different ways that our churches operate, the different frameworks, the different values that we share. And although we might not name those things, they are subconsciously at work all the time. And in that same vein, we have to understand that we as individuals, see if my slide's going to work here, are going through this battle internally, often subconsciously, between tradition which is often where this plausibility structure lives, this framework that our society has agreed on, or this framework that's been passed down to us. And this is valuable, but we can't let this tradition kick out all personal experience and all reason and logic in a way that supersedes everything. That's how we end up with uh, tyrannical structures ultimately. When we lose the ability to ask the questions about why things are the way they are, then we've lost all ability to think critically. And so I've got an example, a little lighthearted after getting a little deep over there. Let me see. I've got something over here. So I don't know if you all are football fans. You don't need to be for this example. Don't worry. But this guy, JJ Watt, has been a athletic marvel in the NFL for a long time. And he's, on the end of his career. He's probably got 1 or 2 good years left. He's always injured, but there's a lot of talk, or there was a lot of talk about where is JJ Watt going to sign this year for the NFL. Now, if you're a Steelers fan, then you know that his 2 younger brothers are on the Steelers right now. And so there was a lot of talk about let's have a trio of Watt brothers on the Steelers. How amazing would that be? And so there was this string of tweets that JJ Watt was putting out that the internet was trying to decipher. And so, and my screen's not working here. There we go. And so JJ Watt put out a tweet. It said, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And then we've got some people that are trying to decipher it. I don't know who these people are, so I apologize if they say anything ridiculous. I figured it out. Mitochondria plays the host in cells. Aaron Rodgers announced as a Jeopardy guest host on the same day JJ Watt tweets this. JJ Watt's going to the Green Bay Packers. Boom. I think that reasoning's a little far-fetched, but it's okay, Logan. I understand. You've got this person over here. Mitochondria Research Center is located in Buffalo. JJ Watt's going to go to the Buffalo Bills. Okay, interesting. Well, then we've got this picture, scary hours that he posts, black and white. He hasn't made a decision yet. Someone goes, okay, Scary Hours is a song by a musician named Drake. Drake is from Canada. Matt Canada is the Steelers coach. So JJ Watt's gonna go to the Steelers. And if you go to the mitochondria comment, like mitochondria cell that splits. So it's like he's a brother, he's got other brothers. He's going to the Steelers. Well, this person down here says, no, this photo is black and white, aka silver and black. JJ Watt's going to Vegas. He's going to the Raiders, which, again, very strange for me to know that the Raiders aren't in Oakland anymore. It's kind of weird. But again, JJ Watt posts right here. His brother made a comment, but midday naps, loathed as a child, revered in adulthood. And I think it's interesting anytime an athlete starts to try and work on their poetry, but I think he should keep working. It's not working for me. So Billy Bop says midday naps equals Minnesota Vikings. Loathed as a child means he was born in Wisconsin, aka rivals with the Vikings, but he'll be revered in adulthood because now he's going to sign with the Vikings. Okay. And then finally, we've got Dak and Zeke, 2 other players. They're from the Cowboys. They have a mattress commercial, which means they're good for naps, which means JJ Watt's going to go to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, again, some of these things are all in jest, but it actually turns out none of those people were right. JJ Watt ended up going to the Cardinals this offseason. So why do I tell you all this? It's a perfect example that sometimes, even with our various interpretations of something, different people can come to different conclusions. It turns out sometimes nobody gets it right. Was JJ Watt going to go to the Cardinals all along? We don't know. Was he changing his mind from week to week? And so he was using different riddles. We don't know. Was he just messing with people the whole time just to have fun on the internet? We don't know. And honestly, it doesn't really matter In this case, you have a final word. JJ Watt can say, "Hey, I'm getting paid, millions of dollars by the Arizona Cardinals." But the difficulty with scripture is that we don't have someone to say that for us. And what this example is supposed to be a lighthearted picture of is the fact that sometimes you can come to a logical conclusion, have it make complete sense, and still be wrong.
Mm.
I'm sure anyone in here that has a spouse or a close friend that you've argued with plenty of times or anything, you know that there's a difference between having a logical conclusion and being right. And often the value of being right in a given situation does not actually pay in the long run. Sometimes it's worth it just to let it go and not be right.
Wow.
But when it comes to scripture, that's a tough thing. Was someone going to interject there?
No, I just sneezed. Excuse me.
Oh, okay. So again, all of these examples from this JJ Watt saga over the off season just point us back to plausibility structures in some way, right? So each of these people, someone wants JJ Watt. He's a great player, and it makes sense why a Green Bay fan is going to find a way to interpret this tweet in a positive way for Green Bay Packers. The same way that Buffalo is going to look for a way to interpret this to make it make sense for Buffalo. Same thing for the Steelers and the Raiders and the Vikings and the Cowboys, because these people want the best for their football team. They know he's great for their football team. And so they're already going into it, interpreting it in that way. Now, there were plenty of people that were doing things like this in jest, but this is how sports radios make a living, right? They just throw out wild conjectures and hope something lands. And sometimes it's because you just care so much. Like you just want to see the best thing ever happen for your team. My best friend Steve from growing up is an Eagles fan. So already, like, I don't know what God's going to do with him. But Steve has been the most obnoxious football fan I've ever met my entire life, because his entire life, every single season, he tells me about how the Eagles are a Super Bowl caliber team. It's just not possible for that to be true, especially when you continue to not make the playoffs. He's like, well, if a couple of those games, if we won a couple more, then we would have made it. I'm like, well, yeah, that's Steve. That is how sports work. If you win more, then you get to keep going. But the point is, you lost. But Steve is so tunnel visioned about his passion and loyalty and love for the Eagles that he just can't help himself. He has to interpret every decision the Eagles organization makes as a good one, as one that is going to propel the team to victory. The worst thing is when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, you know what the first thing he said was, "See, I told you. I told you this would happen." Like, yeah, it doesn't count when you've been saying it since 93, man. Like, eventually you're going to get it right. But this is the kind of thing that happens when we're interpreting scripture. So then we get responses from people, right? Different styles of interpretations. And often you'll hear something like, "Stop complicating it," right? Just read it. Just read what it says. But hopefully, if you've listened to anything we've talked about in the last 3 weeks, we know that things are not always as simple or black and white as we would hope that they are. Sometimes they're a bit more complicated. What's written is not necessarily what we think is written often. Even once we decide on what's been written, we've got the Jesus and Peter example. We still have to decide what it means. And so there's so many funny jokes about this kind of thing, but teenagers are great at making jokes and memes. This is another meme about English teachers and about how English teachers are obsessed with finding secret meanings to things in books. And so, like this kind of image, like here's how long the book actually was. Here's what the author actually meant, but here's what an English teacher wants to say that the author meant, so that they can make you write 17 papers. Another example would be like this Venn diagram: what the author meant, what your English teacher thinks the author meant, and here's the overlap. It says the curtains were blue. English teachers say, well, the blue represents immense depression and a lack of will to go on. But the author just meant the curtains were blue. Stop complicating it. And sometimes it's true. but sometimes it's not. We've got all kinds of books where powerful imageries and metaphors and allegories are occurring, like Animal Farm, easy book, right? To think about, where we're paralleling significant historical figures with animals on a farm talking. Um, Bizarre. But you know
Mhm.
what? As an eighth grader, that book really helped me understand some of the things going on in world history in a different way. That tool, that literary device was really helpful. And sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem. Sometimes the curtains are just blue. Sometimes the curtains do have an underlying meaning. Interpretation is deciding which. And again, that is a dangerously important task. And again, as we've seen, these things are not as clear as we might hope. The Bible's not one book, it's a library of smaller books with many authors written over many time periods. And as a result, um, it's complicated. And we're complicated. We bring our own stuff to the Bible, our own understandings, our own misconceptions or preconceptions or anything in between, and we're imperfect. So even with the best of intentions, we can mess up. So it really leaves us with a pretty complicated situation of interpretation. This is where it's nice to just go, well, tradition says fill in the blank, but we look at world history and we can see outside of our faith, just world history in general, how often tradition can get it wrong. And as important as tradition is, we have to also recognize sometimes we've got to look at what Calvin said and go, maybe you were off a few degrees. Maybe burning organs in the streets because they're the devil's instrument wasn't exactly the reaction we should have had. Maybe smashing stained glass windows because they're idolatrous wasn't exactly what we should have done. Maybe we've got countless examples. And so when we talk about interpretation, there's all kinds of literary devices that are used. And so, just to name one, hyperbole, right? This is something we utilize all the time. Um, in everyday conversation, in the books that we read, or the articles we see. I had a clip, but it wasn't playing, so I took it out. But the famous line, I'll give you the moon. Well, we know you can't give someone the moon. It's a hyperbole. It's something that's there to help make a point, but we know that it's not literally true in that same way. The song "You Are My Sunshine," like, okay, that's really sweet, but someone can't be sunshine. Someone might be able to represent the things that sunshine is, like you're a light in my life, or you make me happy, you make the bad stuff seem better, but you're not literally sunshine. But we don't think about it. No one listens to that song and goes, "This is so stupid because it's not literal. You can't be sunshine." You instantly know what the singer is communicating. You know how to interpret that on the fly, subconsciously. If you've seen the Christmas movie Elf, there's a hilarious, well, most of it's hilarious, but maybe I'm just showing that my years by thinking it's hilarious. But there's the famous scene where this like really naive guy walks into a New York City coffee shop that has a sign in the window that says "World's Best cup of coffee," and he walks in and goes, "Wow, congratulations, you did it!" And he believed that was the world's best cup of coffee. But we all know that is not the world's best cup of coffee. You're not getting the best cup of coffee for 75 cents in a styrofoam cup. But that's just how we roll. You've got Titanic. I'm the king of the world. No, you're not. Leonardo DiCaprio is not the king of the world. He didn't make it through the weekend. Spoiler alert. But when he's standing on the edge of the boat and he feels like he's lighter than air, you feel like the king of the world. There's a song by this boy band, One Direction, called One Thing. It's like a really dorky love song from when I was in middle school. Um, but there's this line that says, "You're my kryptonite." Now, you all know why I don't sing on Sunday mornings. But there's a number of things that happen that we can utilize our skills from the last few weeks to understand, right? Okay, well, we know that someone can't literally be kryptonite because it doesn't exist. But if you understand the story of Superman, then you know what kryptonite is. So you're like, oh, you're saying someone is a figurative thing that represents something else. Okay. Well, what is kryptonite to Superman? It's the one thing that makes him lose his powers. Okay. Well, that's a bad thing. Every time kryptonite comes on the scene for Superman, bad things happen because he can't help anyone. So, are you how do you call someone kryptonite in a love song? That sounds like a negative thing. But again, it's hyperbole, it's metaphor, it's all kinds of literary things at once. And saying, "Well, you make me weak." Well, weakness is bad. Well, not in a love situation. Usually, oh, I'm weak in the knees. That's a good thing because I feel so much. We do this all the time, guys, all the time. But for some reason, we've got this blockade in front of us when it comes to the Bible. We go, oh, well, yeah, we do that in love songs and in movies and in all our literature and our newspapers and our conversations, but we definitely don't do that in the Bible. We're the first humans to ever do this. As you can imagine, the answer to that is probably no. And so when we talk about this, like think about word association, right? What do words represent in our minds? What images do they bring to our minds? So, red, earth, delicious. What do you think of when you think of the word red? What do you think of when you think of earth or delicious? Did you notice that I used three words that, acrostically spell red again? Look, I pulled one over on you. Didn't even notice. It's how our brains work. They simplify as many things as possible so that we can use our higher functioning thinking to do other things. And so if I say red, maybe you think stoplight, maybe you think stop sign, maybe you think like seeing red, like an angry animal, that old idea. You think of earth, do you think of like a globe? Do you think of a flat earth? We can talk about that. Do you think of dirt? Uh-oh. Any scientists in the chat are upset because I said dirt instead of soil. Um, what comes to your mind when you think of earth? What do you think of delicious? Do you like salty foods, sweet foods? We have different things that words associate with in our brains. And this happens in the Bible too. So let's look at an example. When I put up this picture of a pier in the ocean, it looks pretty tranquil. It's pretty relaxing. I love the beach personally. This is a not so tranquil situation in the ocean. Thunderstorms, lightning striking the ocean. I've always wondered as a kid, and I've never Googled this. All the things I've Googled, all the things I've put in this, presentation in the last few weeks, I never Googled what happens when lightning hits the ocean. Like, at what point is the water no longer dangerous? Is it 20 feet out, 2,000 feet? I gotta look that up. But just my open thoughts. But these are the kinds of things that come to our mind, right? Ocean can be good, ocean can be bad and scary. Um, so here's an image that goes around the internet sometimes. It's a verse from Psalms. Be still and know that I am God. I'm sure that most, if not all of us, have heard this text. It's a beautiful text. It's a powerful text. There's all kinds of great music that's been made to this text. I mean, it connotes something so significant that sometimes we just need to be still. We need to relax. We need to find space to see God. But then I also found this one on the internet, which is a little bit different. It's the same idea, but in a different way, right? Be still and know that I am God. Okay, well, this image is kind of less like relax, go on vacation, be still. This one's like, okay, when everything around you is going crazy, be still. So, okay, well, obviously these images do shape the way we think about these things. We throw this verse on pillows. So maybe you've got one of these. It's very decorative. Be still and know. Now we've taken out the last phrase because we're so familiar with this passage that we know that be still and know, we know how to finish it, right? Well, we've got a number of different versions of this passage as we know in translation, be still and know that I am God in the NRSV. Well, this is weird. Let be then. Let it be, like the Beatles. Okay. Learn that I am God. Not know, learn that I am God. Interesting. Desist. Realize that I am God. It's from the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. That's enough. Now know that I am God. Okay. So I would say this first reading is kind of a quiet or peaceful reading. Be still. We see this language used by Jesus when he calms the storm. Perhaps that's why we've got an image of a crazy storm with this verse from Psalms in it. Well, this second version kind of connotes a little bit of yielding and letting go. Um, let it be. Okay. Well, desist. Well, what words come to our mind? Well, you got to cease and desist. Maybe it's stop doing something. Stop and know that I am God. But realize is an interesting word. It's almost like you've been interacting with God for a while, but you didn't quite know that he was God. So now I had an epiphany. I realize it. And again, I think this last one's another quiet, more peaceful reading. Now, if I put the entire chapter of Psalm 46 up with no capital letters and no punctuation, the way that it would have been in the ancient text, it's not really enjoyable to read. Plus, it's a PowerPoint. So let's reorganize this with our chapter and verse numbers. Again, we know that that's not part of the original text, those verse numbers, but they do help us flow a little bit more. But this is actually the whole chapter of chapter 46 there. And here on the right hand in verse 10 is where we get this line, be still and know that I am God, which is great. And it is a great sentiment and it's really important. But when we put it into the context of this larger chapter, it doesn't necessarily connote like a throw pillow kind of vibe. So we've got God is our refuge and strength, very present help in a time of trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God's in the midst of the city, it shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in uproar, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on earth. That's not a good word. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. This is a great sentiment. Be still and know that I am God. And we can connect it to a couple places in this chapter. He's our refuge, our strength. Be still and know that I am God. Even though there's stuff going on, we will not fear. Be still and know that I am God. Even when the mountains tremble, be still and know that I am God. But this phrase coming from God himself, this is like the narration is stopping. This is God speaking for God's self, is in response to saying that God will end these wars himself. He'll break the bows, shatter these spears, burn shields with fire, and proclaim he is God. He's stopping everything that's going on around us to say, I am God. Pay attention. I'm God. Realize I'm God. Know that I'm God. Interpretation of this kind of passage is important because although the sentiment of just throwing it on a throw pillow is great, it's not necessarily capturing exactly what this text is doing. Now, there are debates about what this text is doing. Is this a declaration of war or is this a declaration after war has occurred? What happens in Psalm chapter 45 or in 47? These are all parts of that context that we can look into translation that we can look into. and interpretation, obviously. But this is just one example of a place where a common phrase that we love, that we throw around a lot in our churches for good reasons. It's really important for us to slow down, but we do have to look at it at a broader scope as well. And so, as you can imagine, interpretation has changed drastically through the ages, drastically. And the plausibility structures have changed through the ages. And that's almost always in response to or in line with the culture of the time. And we can trace a pretty significant development in thought over time in interpretation. So, this is a book I have. If you see my camera, look, proof, I've got it right here. But this is one of countless books like this. A history of biblical interpretation, starting from the first century, going up all the way. I think this book ends in maybe the 90s or early 2000s. And it's not every single person, but 35 chapters of the difference between people that read things literally to figuratively to metaphorically to a feminist view or a liberation theology view or y- the the possibilities of how we interpret scripture are essentially infinite because there's always a new twist to put on things. And even that language of twist can be misleading because it might sound like I'm saying we're twisting scripture. I think that happens, but the reason that we've got different variations of theology, blank theology. So let's say feminist theology or liberation theology. Um, it's not because like, oh, well, like we're going to go through the Bible and find every way to make this pro woman. That's not what feminist theology is in its essence. It can become that in its worst setting, maybe, but what it is saying women have not had an equal voice in this conversation for a long time. So let's look at scripture through this lens. In the same way that, we all are interpreting Bible and we go, well, we don't need these special kinds of interpretation, just interpret it. But again, we all have plausibility structures that we might not even notice how much that Mike Kramer, despite not being a fundamentalist for like, I don't know, a decade now, that's where I grew up. And there might be some subconscious things from the way I was raised to view the Bible that influence the way I read it now. Even though I disagree with so much of those things now, it still can have ripple effects in my life and in interpretation. And so, even if we're aware of some of those things, we still struggle um, to move past it. And so we're going to end today. We're going to introduce this text. We're not going to spend too much time talking about it today. We'll come back to it next week and look at some different ways that we can interpret it. But Luke chapter 10 has one of the most famous parables of all time for a lot of reasons. So I'm going to read to us briefly here, and then we'll discuss a little bit to wrap up. So just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? The lawyer answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you've given the right answer. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal. He brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii He gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him. When I come back, I will repay whatever you spend." Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." So that's from Luke chapter 10. Let's do a little interpretive exercise for our last few minutes together. What does this mean? How would you summarize a story? Who are the main characters? Let's look at this now. So someone interject. Give me the cliff notes. What do we call this story?
The Good Samaritan.
Right. Usually people call it the Good Samaritan, but that's what our Bibles call it. Jesus never says this is the story of a Good Samaritan, but we've come to name it that. Good. So what is if anyone's willing to just give us the 30-second elevator pitch, what's the moral of this parable? What is the point? What are we learning? What are we
The person that helped Jesus was the unlikely one. I mean, the person that helped the man on the road was the unlikely one because he was a foreigner and wouldn't normally be helping Jews.
Totally, right? Back to our Bible timeline, Samaritans were from that northern kingdom. Samaria was the capital up there. The Southerners, the line of Judah, the line of Jesus, they did not like Samaritans. They were heretics. So the fact that the Samaritan's helping a Jewish person, I mean, that's really provocative. Thanks, Anne. What else? What else do we get from this story that we feel like this is important for us to latch on to?
The man who was wounded and beaten and stripped, lying there, and I read the Message this morning, this parable in the Message, and it said, luckily, a priest came along, and that man who was wounded was probably thinking, oh, good, he's going to help me. And he was the one that should have helped him. And also the Levite. They were both, but they had better things to do. They had to go, to the temple to do whatever their duty called them to do, and they missed the best part, or the most important part, to help their neighbor.
Yeah. Interesting, right? Like how can this person or these people in these positions of religious authority so clearly miss the mark?
Yeah.
What's up with that? Thank you. Any other observations?
I was just going to say that our neighbor is anybody who's in need, not just people that we like or who are acceptable to our social group or whatever, but Jesus seems to be saying whoever is in need is your neighbor.
Yeah. So when we read this story, I mean, there are some powerful moral points we can walk away with, right? But interpretively, there are a number of things that just came up in our discussion. One is that the Levite and the priest were being negligent on purpose. Well, this is obviously a possibility. I would say that is the case, but there are interpretive moves where we say, well, when you look at the rules of what Levites and priests were allowed to do, well, the man was described as being left half dead and appearing dead on the side of the road. And whether or not priests and Levites are allowed to touch dead bodies, there's a very specific timetable on when they're allowed to do that and what it means to do that, because it makes you unclean. The beginning of the passage says that these men were coming down from Jerusalem. So it would appear that they already did all of their temple work for that day, perhaps. Maybe they had already cleansed themselves and now they're about to go home and, oh no, I'm going to get unclean again, but I just left. And maybe that's playing into this scenario. Or maybe that's just over reading. Maybe it's an English teacher situation where, man, it says what it says. But then there's some other stuff, right? The Samaritan puts the man left half for dead on his own animal, pours wine over the wounds, pays for him to stay in this inn, and that's significant. I mean, he's using his own resources to care for a stranger. What an admirable thing. And when we read this kind of story, I'm sure we often go, that's what we need to do. But usually we don't find half dead people on the side of the road. And so that would be an easy parallel for us to draw. But sometimes we see people in other kinds of need that we're not too interested in helping out with, that we encounter. So that's part of like, all right, how do we interpret that shift? Um, the title of this story, the Good Samaritan, which has been one of the most popularized ways to understand this little narrative. I remember reading this Jewish scholar who talks about this in a really good book I read called Short Stories by Jesus. And basically, she's reading um, a bunch of these parables of Jesus through a Jewish lens to help draw out some of the Jewish things going on or the Jewish meaning in that culture. She said, isn't it interesting that in this title alone, we call it the Good Samaritan? What does that title imply?
That Samaritans were bad.
Exactly. Here's the story of that one good Samaritan. I don't like those Samaritans, but look, I found a good one. The implication before we even start reading is that we don't want nothing to do with those Samaritans. Here's one good one, though. Now, Jesus using a Samaritan at all is provocative for his listeners for a number of theological and cultural reasons. But the way that we have passed this story down through the ages is significant too, because I don't think anyone here is thinking, oh, those dirty, rotten Samaritans. But we all have people in our lives that we've decided are not good people, whether it's a certain family we know. In the worst cases in human history, it can be based on ethnicity and race, but maybe it's those darn Baptists down the street, or those Anglicans, or fill in the blank, or those Catholics. I mean, we do this within our Christian circles. You go, oh well, I did meet that one good Catholic, so here's my story from that. The implication there already is shaping the way that we think about these things. Now, in this case, it's helpful because it points us to that cultural nuance. But Jesus's entire point is that the person you expected not to help is, in fact, also capable of being good. And the people we expect to be good have the capacity to be bad in the Levite and priest. And so all of these things play into the way we interpret. We're going to come back to this story next week. We're at 12:02. So I'm going to let us go here. But as you can imagine, the plausibility structures of how cultures have understood things throughout the ages have shaped the way the church understands things. And from person to person, theologian to theologian, from time period to time period, our emphases on how we read the Bible, even this term literalism, just read it literally, just read what it says. That's actually not something that was as significant 1,000 to 2,000 years ago as we make it sometimes today. It's a product of culture. And we have to sift through that culture to figure out which of these things in our current circumstances are worth holding on to and which aren't. Which parts of tradition are significant and which parts were mistakes that we need to correct in our current day. That's what happens in the task of interpretation. So we're going to come back to this story next week. Maybe read it again and see if anything else jumps out to you. What are the ways that you read it? What are the things that happen in you? Maybe use some of the spiritual practices we've talked about, from Lectio Divina to Ignatian prayer. Read this story every day this week. Does something new stand out to you? Is something weird? These are the kinds of questions that will help us get a little bit deeper in that interpretive process.